So Europe is about to do something huge. It's banning the sale of all new gas and diesel cars starting in 2035. The engine that defined the last century? Gone. Today, we're digging into the real story behind this massive gamble. And trust me, it's not what you think.
Okay, so the big question is, why? Why would an entire continent decide to just kill off more than 100 years of automotive technology? Well, on the surface, the answer seems pretty simple, and it's probably the one you've heard 1,000 times.
And look, on paper, that's true. The stated reason is to hit some very ambitious climate goals. But, and this is the key, if you think this is just an environmental policy, you are missing the biggest part of the story.
Yeah, that's right. Because underneath all the green talk, there's this incredible geopolitical thriller unfolding. It's a high-stakes story about an industry in crisis, a massive strategic bet, and the decision to use regulation as a weapon. And it all kicked off with one heck of a scandal.
Let's rewind a bit, back to 2015. At that time, the European car industry, especially the German giants, had bet their entire future on a technology they called clean diesel. This was their whole thing, right? Their silver bullet for fighting climate change while keeping their competitive edge. And you know what? For a long time, it was working. Before 2015, diesel cars were more than half of all new cars sold in Europe. This wasn't just another option on the table. For them, it was the table. And then, in a flash, the whole thing just fell apart.
And then, Dieselgate hit. Volkswagen got caught red-handed cheating on emissions tests. The whole clean diesel story just vanished overnight. And this wasn't just some bad press. This was an existential threat. The very foundation of their strategy, poof, gone. Public trust was completely destroyed.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Just look at the timing here. Before 2015, you see the EU emissions rules getting a little stricter, but it's a slow, steady climb. After Dieselgate, bam, the timeline just goes into overdrive, leading straight to what is basically a total ban. This was no coincidence. This was a direct reaction. So, with their big diesel plan totally wrecked and regulators breathing down their necks, what do you do? Well, European automakers knew they couldn't win the hybrid game. Japan owned that. So they decided to just skip that chapter entirely and jump to a whole new battlefield, battery electric vehicles, or BEVs. And when I say they went all in, I am not kidding. I mean, look at this number. Volkswagen alone threw something like 100 billion euros at this electric transformation. This wasn't just dipping a toe in the water. This was a cannonball into the deep end. And it wasn't just VW. Nope. The whole German auto industry got the memo. Mercedes, BMW, they all made these absolutely massive commitments. They were all pushing their chips to the center of the table, and the bet was on electric. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. You've just bet your entire company, no, your entire continent's most important industry on one single technology. How on earth do you make sure that bet pays off? How do you guarantee people will actually buy the thing you're spending billions on? Well, you don't just sit back and hope a market appears. You create it. You rig the game in your favor. And this is where the car companies went to the regulators in Brussels, not as enemies, but as partners, with a pretty radical idea. The strategy was as brilliant as it was brutal. If you can't convince the market to choose BEVs on its own, you just get rid of all the other choices. So that 2035 ban, it wasn't just a punishment for the industry. It was their safety net. It created a captive market where sooner or later you have to buy an EV. And they designed the rules to be like a boa constrictor, just slowly tightening the screws. A little squeeze in 2025, a much, much bigger one in 2030, until finally in 2035, it's game over for the internal combustion engine. Each step makes it harder and harder to sell anything else. So with this one single policy, they were trying to pull off a geopolitical hat trick. First, knock out Japan's massive advantage in hybrid tech. Second, put up a regulatory wall against the rising tide of Chinese car makers. And third, give their own companies a fresh start on a battlefield where they helped write the rulebook. But here's the thing. A move this massive doesn't just happen because some car execs want it to. You need political muscle. And that meant getting Europe's biggest players on the same page, even if they all had their own reasons for signing on. And this table just lays it out perfectly. You've got Germany, kind of holding its nose, but ultimately wanting some certainty for its huge investments. Then there's France, seeing a golden opportunity to push its own companies like Renault and maybe poke Germany in the eye a little. And then you have the Nordic countries, who are already way ahead on EVs, basically saying, hey, everyone, just do what we're doing. Of course, when you're a market as huge as Europe, you don't make a decision like this in a vacuum. It creates ripples, no, waves, that wash over the entire globe, forcing everybody else to react. And you can really see that when you look at Japan. Their whole philosophy was a multi-pathway approach. Hybrids, plug-in hybrids, BEVs, even hydrogen. But the EU's move was basically a giant sledgehammer to that idea, saying, nope, there's only one path allowed here, and it's electric. And then you've got the elephant in the room, China. It's this crazy situation where Europe is completely reliant on China for the batteries to power this grand electric dream. But at the same time, they're absolutely terrified that Chinese car companies like BYD are going to come in and eat their lunch, which is why you see them launching these anti-subsidy investigations. It's complicated. So Europe has basically built its own private playground and invited everyone to play by its rules. But that is a really, really risky move. And we're already seeing the cracks start to show. Just look at the UK. They were all in, but they just had to pump the brakes and push their own ban back, admitting it's too expensive and the infrastructure just isn't there yet. That's a huge red flag. And that really gets to the heart of it all. This policy, this regulation, it's an incredibly powerful weapon. Part climate policy, part industrial strategy. But like any weapon, it's double-edged. It can cut both ways. If infrastructure doesn't keep up, if batteries stay expensive, or if people just don't want to be forced, this could backfire badly. And that's where we stand. Europe flipped the chessboard over to save its most important industry. It changed the entire game. The only question that's left, the billion-euro question, is, can it actually win the game it created?